Welcome to Everyday Miracles, where ordinary people create extraordinary moments. Every day, acts of kindness, courage, and compassion change lives in ways we never expect. Sit back, relax, and discover a story that will restore your faith in humanity. This is Everyday Miracles. The city of Chicago was painted in shades of gray that evening. A cold, persistent drizzle fell from the sky, making the streets shimmer like a wet, dark mirror. Inside the warm, golden glow of Luca's, an upscale Italian restaurant on the Magnificent Mile, the world was different. It smelled of garlic, butter, and oregano. It was a world of crisp white tablecloths, clinking glasses, and the quiet hum of contented diners. And then there was the man outside the window. Chef Marco Rossi had seen him there before. A figure slumped against the brick wall, wrapped in a tattered sleeping bag. Tonight, Marco had to walk right past him to get into the restaurant for his evening shift. The man was in his spot, the one just to the left of the entrance, where the warm air from the kitchen vent created a faint pocket of heat. As Marco approached, the man looked up. His face was weathered and gaunt, his eyes tired. He held up a hand, a silent plea for change. Marco, already late and feeling the stress of a fully booked dining room, did what he always did. He walked by. He didn't meet the man's eyes. He pulled his collar tighter and pushed the heavy oak door open, stepping into the warmth and noise of the restaurant. It was just another part of the city noise. Marco Rossi was known for two things, his perfect risotto and his temper. At 38, he had worked his way up from a dishwasher in a small trattoria to the head chef of one of the most prestigious restaurants in the city. He was a master of his craft, a man who demanded perfection from his staff and gave nothing less to his customers. But a storm was brewing in his life. The restaurant, which he had helped build from the ground up, was facing a financial crisis. The owner, a detached investor from New York, was threatening to close it down. Marco's dream of one day owning the place himself was crumbling. He took out his frustrations on the kitchen staff, barking orders, slamming pans, and growing more irritable by the day. Meanwhile, the homeless man, whom the staff had come to call Leo, was a fixture. He didn't cause trouble. He just sat there. The waiting staff would sometimes bring him a bowl of soup or a bread roll at the end of the night, but Marco had forbidden it. "It encourages them to stay," he would say sternly, not wanting the restaurant to look like a shelter. One evening, after a particularly disastrous dinner service where a wealthy customer had sent back a steak 3 times, Marco was in a foul mood. He was wiping down the stainless steel counters, the rest of the staff having gone home, when he saw the night manager, Daniel, carrying a small bag of leftover food towards the back door. "Daniel?" Marco's voice cut through the quiet kitchen like a knife. "What are you doing?" Daniel froze. "Just taking the scraps out, chef." Marco walked over and snatched the bag from his hand. He walked to the back door, threw it into the trash bin outside with a loud clatter, and slammed the door shut. "We are not a charity," he growled. "And I do not want him outside my door. It's bad for business." He was angry, tired, and feeling trapped. The man outside was just another symbol of everything that was wrong. The situation with the homeless man became a point of silent contention in the restaurant. One server, a kind-hearted young woman named Elena, would occasionally slip Leo a cup of coffee from the espresso machine when Marco was in his office. The staff saw the vulnerability in the man's eyes, a fragility that seemed out of place in the harsh city. He was always polite, always grateful, but he rarely spoke. The weather grew colder. The first snow of winter fell, blanketing the city in a heavy white silence. Marco arrived for his shift one evening to find a small crowd gathered outside the restaurant. He pushed through to see what was happening. There in the snow, the man named Leo had collapsed. His face was pale, his breath shallow. Someone had called an ambulance, but the paramedics were stuck in traffic. Marco felt a surge of irritation. "Get him away from the door!" he snapped. "The customers can't get in." Elena looked at him, her expression a mixture of shock and disappointment. "Chef, he's freezing to death." Marco was about to argue when the man on the ground opened his eyes. He looked up at Marco, and for a fleeting moment their eyes met. There was no anger in Leo's gaze, only a deep, profound sadness and a flicker of something else. Recognition? Then his eyes fluttered shut again, and his hand fell limply to his side. It was in that moment that Marco noticed it. The ring. It was a simple silver band tarnished with age and dirt. But it was the design that caught Marco's eye. It was a delicate, intricate pattern of interlocking vines and roses. It was the exact same design as a ring his own mother had worn, a ring he had given to his sister, Elena, before she disappeared 20 years ago. The world seemed to stop. The noise of the street, the bitter wind, the whispering crowd, it all faded into a dull hum. Marco stared at that ring, a memory flooding his mind. His mother, her hands gentle, placing the ring on his sister's finger. "For luck," she had whispered. "No," Marco stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "It can't be." He knelt down in the snow, completely forgetting the customers, the restaurant, and his pride. He gently took the man's cold hand. The ring was identical. He turned it over, and his heart stopped. On the inside, he knew, there was an inscription. A tiny, barely legible engraving of a rose. He had made that ring himself when he was just a boy, a clumsy gift for his little sister. He looked at the man's face, really looked at it, past the grime and the beard. He saw the same curve of the jaw, the same tired eyes that his sister had had. "Elena!" he whispered, his voice cracking. The man on the ground stirred. His eyes fluttered open again. A small, weak smile formed on his lips as he looked at Marco. "Mark," he breathed. At that moment, the ambulance arrived. Paramedics rushed forward, pushing Marco aside. But Marco was in a daze. He watched them lift the man who was actually a woman, onto a stretcher. He watched them load her into the ambulance and drive away, the siren wailing in the distance. Marco was frozen in shock. Elena had run away from home when she was 19. They had a terrible fight. Marco had been cruel, jealous of the attention she received. He never saw her again. The family had searched for years, but eventually they had given up hope. They assumed she was dead. All this time she had been right here, outside his restaurant. All this time Marco had been walking past her, ignoring her, and treating her with contempt. He drove to the hospital in a blinding snowstorm. His mind was a hurricane of guilt and regret. He thought of all the times he had been harsh, all the times he had yelled at her as a child, and all the times he had simply walked past her on the street, telling himself she was just a stranger. He found her in a small, sterile room in the emergency ward. The nurses had cleaned her up. Her hair, though streaked with gray, was the same shade of auburn he remembered. Her face was thinner, etched with lines of hardship, but it was unmistakably Elena. She was awake, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. When Marco walked in, she turned her head. A single tear escaped the corner of her eye. "Marco," she said, her voice hoarse but clear. "Why?" was all Marco could manage. "How? Why didn't you ever come home?" She shook her head slowly. "I was so ashamed," she whispered. "I made so many mistakes. I didn't think you'd want me back. And when I saw you, on that first day, I was so close, but I couldn't speak. I was terrified you'd turn me away." Marco fell into a chair by her bed, his head in his hands. Tears streamed down his face. He had done exactly that. He had turned her away countless times. He had ignored the very person he had been searching for in his heart for 2 decades. He reached out and took her hand, the one with the ring. "You still have it," he sobbed. "You still have the ring I gave you." Elena smiled, a weak but genuine smile. "I never took it off. It was all I had to remind me of who I was." Elena spent a week in the hospital. She was malnourished, sick, and exhausted, but she was alive. Marco visited her every single day. He brought her food, real food, not the scraps from the trash. He made her his mother's recipe for chicken soup. He talked about their childhood, about their mother, and he finally, truly apologized. Marco went back to work a changed man. The anger that had fueled him for years was gone. He no longer barked orders or slammed pans. The staff noticed the difference immediately. The head chef was patient and kind, and the homeless man was gone. When people asked what had happened to him, Marco would just smile, a sad, gentle smile. "He's home now," he would say. Marco convinced the owner to give him a chance, and with a newfound passion and patience, he turned the restaurant around. He began a community program, serving free meals to the homeless 1 day a week. He made sure the food was never stale or thrown away. It was warm, nourishing, and made with respect. Sometimes he would see a new face outside the restaurant, huddled against the cold. He would walk out, not with a scowl, but with a cup of coffee and a warm meal. He would see the fear in their eyes, the distrust, and he would remember. He would remember that the person he had spent years ignoring was the one person who meant the most to him. We walk through life with blinders on, too busy to see the miracles happening right at our feet. We often look for grandeur, for loud signs and trumpet blasts, while the universe is trying to speak to us through a whisper. We look for angels in the sky, but sometimes they are the ones sitting in the cold, hoping for a moment of warmth. Marco learned the hardest lesson of all, that the person we most need to love may be the one we have been ignoring the most. Every stranger has a story, a family, a past. Every soul is fighting a battle we know nothing about. And sometimes the smallest act of kindness isn't just a kind gesture. It can be the first step toward a miracle.